Chapter 1. The Pale Road. The pale road slithered through the Ostermark countryside like a dying serpent, twisting, sinking in places where the spring rains had churned the path to mud. Blackened trees leaned like hanged men over the wagon-rutted trail, their leafless branches creaking softly in the mist-choked air. Matthias Kruger rode alone, his wide-brimmed hat pulled low over storm-gray eyes. A long, weather-beaten coat of oiled leather flared behind him with each step of his obsidian-coated warhorse, Vengeance. The beast snorted steam in the cold morning fog, hooves clacking against hidden stones. The witch-hunter's face was a chiseled mask, stern, angular, and scarred. He bore the weight of judgment in every deliberate motion, the silver-etched hammer of Sigmar slung at his hip, and a long-barreled repeater pistol strapped to his saddle. A crow cawed from above. Another answered from the trees ahead. He passed the rotted remains of a cart, half buried in a ditch, wheels snapped, the driver's bones long since picked clean. Matthias did not dismount. Death was no stranger on the pale road. As he crested the final hill, the village of Drachenfeldt emerged from the mist like a fading bruise on the land. Crooked, timber-framed cottages clustered behind a low palisade of sharpened logs, sagging from neglect. The watchtower, if it could be called such, was little more than a splintering scaffold, manned by a pair of hollow-eyed militiamen with rusty spears. A bell rang once, weak and tinny, more warning than welcome. Matthias rode up to the gates and halted. The militiamen stared down but made no move to open them. One of them, a narrow-chinned boy, no older than 16, gazed at Matthias's coat and the twin-tailed comet badge upon his chest, then flinched like he'd been struck. Finally, the elder of the two barked, "Name and business." "Matthias Kruger, witch-hunter of Altdorf," he said coldly. "Summoned by your burgermeister concerning livestock mutilations and disappearances." The men exchanged glances. Then the gate creaked open, just wide enough for horse and rider. Inside, the village was no better than its exterior. A corpse held upright by habit alone. Mud clogged the streets, chickens scratched nervously in yards devoid of laughter or music, eyes peered from shuttered windows, women clutched children closer as Matthias passed, whispering prayers under their breath. He dismounted before the Dead Heart Tavern, tying Vengeance to a hitching post. The innkeeper, red-eyed, balding, watched from the doorway, his knuckles white around a filthy apron. "Room?" Matthias asked. "Hey, room and feed 12 shillings. Pay now." The man didn't meet his eyes. Matthias dropped the coin into the man's hand, his expression unchanged. "Tell your burgermeister I expect him at sundown." "I'll be here." The tavern smelled of boiled turnips, cheap beer, and resignation. A single hearth coughed out smoke and heat. Locals sat scattered in silence, lifting mugs with shaking hands. When Matthias entered, the room stilled to a hush. An old woman crossed herself. A man spat on the floor. Witch hunters were never welcome. Their presence meant secrets would be unearthed, and Drakenfeld had secrets buried deep in its rotting roots. A burst of wind slammed the door shut behind him. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Wood. A wet fog clung to the village like a shroud as Matthias Kruger stepped out of the Dead Heart before sunrise. The mist smelled of damp rot and old blood. Crows perched on rooftops, their black eyes glinting as if they knew more than they ought. The burgermeister, Ewald Hess, met him at the edge of the village, flanked by 2 trembling farmhands wielding pitchforks. Hess was a bloated man, sweating despite the morning chill, and reeked of sour ale and fear. "It's the Beastmen," he wheezed. "No doubt of it. They've come again, like in my grandfather's time, dragging animals into the forest, slaughtering them for their dark rites." "Show me," Matthias said. They led him down a path cut through the withering wheat fields to the tree line, where the forest loomed like a black wall of twisted limbs. It was called Waldschatten, the Shadow Wood. Even birds avoided its heart. 50 yards in, the trees grew warped and too close, clawing at the sky like starving men reaching for mercy. And there it lay. The remains of the cow, if it could still be called that, hung sprawled across a ring of mushrooms black as coal. Its ribcage was splayed open, bones gleaming white and polished as ivory. No flesh remained, no sinew, not even flies buzzed around it. Matthias crouched beside the carcass, his fingers brushing the soil near the creature's head. No drag marks, no blood trail, just the stink of cold earth. He turned over a nearby bone and narrowed his eyes. The marrow had been sucked clean. "There's no chaos taint," he said almost to himself. Hess blinked, confused. "What?" "No runes, no fecund stench of Nurgle, no warp taint. If beastmen did this, they cleaned up like surgeons and burned their spoor." He rose, scanning the trees. Then he noticed it. A symbol carved into the bark of a nearby pine. Not the crude marks of a bray herd, but something older, angular, predatory, a rough sigil resembling a twisted crown above a gaping maw. "This isn't the work of beastmen," Matthias growled. He turned, eyes sharp. "Has anyone else gone missing?" Hess shifted uneasily. "3, all animals, but one man too. Marek, the old shepherd, went to search for his dog 2 nights ago, hasn't come back." Matthias looked deeper into the woods. The fog seemed to retreat from his gaze, but not fully. It curled, waiting. He stepped forward and suddenly knelt. Something glittered in the moss. A tooth, yellowed and broken, human in shape, but far too large. He stood slowly. "Your woods are cursed, and if what hunts in them is what I suspect, we're dealing with something far worse than beastmen." A shrill bleat echoed in the distance, then cut off. One of the farmhands gasped and stepped back. Matthias turned toward the sound, drawing his pistol with a smooth, practiced motion. Whatever haunted Drachenfeld's forests had learned to feed silently. Chapter 3. Iron and Salt. The chapel of Sigmar in Drachenfeld squatted like a beaten dog on the edge of the square, its stone walls streaked with mildew, the twin-tailed comet barely visible on its rotting oak doors. Cracked stained glass filtered sickly light into the nave, where damp hung heavy in the air, and mold crept across the flagstones like decay-made flesh. Matthias pushed through the doors, boots echoing in the silence. The scent of burned incense and cold iron lingered in the air. Rows of benches stood mostly empty save for the occasional wax-dripped candle and broken prayer scroll. It looked less like a house of worship and more like a tomb. Behind the altar knelt Father Jürgen Mirksch, a gaunt priest with parchment skin stretched thin over a skull-like face. His hands, wrapped in yellowing bandages, clutched a prayer book so tightly his knuckles bled white. The hammer of Sigmar hung heavy on his chest, though rust dulled its luster. He did not rise when Matthias approached, only turned with a hollow-eyed stare that bore the weight of sleepless nights and unspoken terrors. "You are the witch hunter?" Jürgen said, voice barely above a whisper. Matthias nodded. "And you're the priest charged with keeping Sigmar's light burning. Seems your flame is guttering, Father." The priest gave a humorless smile. "The wind here is strong." Matthias scanned the walls behind the altar. He noticed iron nails hammered into the stone in crude wards, and salt poured in thick lines along the windowsills and doorways, renewed recently, judging by the freshness of the grain. He touched one. "Salt. Iron. Old ways. Not Sigmarite doctrine." Jürgen flinched, then dropped his gaze. "The villagers demanded it. They say it wards off things that drink the soul, not just the blood. I do not believe in such superstition, of course, but faith comes in many forms out here." Matthias stepped closer. "Tell me what you fear." The priest hesitated, then whispered, It comes in the night, not just for livestock. There are whispers, wailing in the forest like children crying, but twisted. One boy, Johann, he followed the voice into the woods, came back 3 days later, hollow, eyes black as ink, hung himself in the barn. Matthias's expression didn't change, but his knuckles tightened. Father Jurgen continued. I tried to perform rites over the beast-slain cattle. The bodies wouldn't take them. They smoked, curled like salted slugs. Something is mocking Sigmar's presence here. The door creaked behind them. Burgermeister Ewald Hess entered, face waxy and pale. Sweat stained his collar. He nodded stiffly to Matthias, keeping his eyes off the altar. Anything useful from the priest? He asked. I'm hearing more from the walls than from either of you, Matthias replied sharply. Hess bristled. I've done what I can, kept the people calm, boarded windows, tripled watches. Beastmen don't fear salt or iron, Matthias interrupted. Your village is preparing for something older, something it remembers, even if you don't. Hess swallowed. There are stories. An old noble family fell into ruin, built crypts in the woods. We don't speak of them. My grandfather used to say, their hunger never died. A wind shrieked down the chimney. Somewhere in the rafters a board cracked. Father Jurgen clutched his hammer. Matthias turned for the door. Seal this chapel, keep the salt fresh, and pray that your faith holds longer than your courage. He left them standing in the gloom, beneath the cold, uncaring eyes of a god whose light barely touched this place anymore. Outside, the crows were circling again. Chapter 4. The Forgotten Chapel. The forest breathed around him. A noxious mist slithered through the trees as Matthias Kruger hacked his way deeper into the Waldschatten, the cursed wood that loomed like a predator outside Drachenfeldt. Crows watched from above in silent judgment. The branches groaned like gallows, clawing at Matthias's coat, whispering with every passing gust. For hours he had scouted the woods, moving silently, methodically, searching for any trace of the stories buried in half-whispers and guilty glances. Then he saw it, veiled in creeping moss and swallowed by vines. A ruin. A chapel. Half consumed by the forest, the structure emerged from the earth like a rotting tooth. Its walls, once pale marble, were stained green and black. A broken iron gate leaned drunkenly on rusted hinges, beneath which lay the shattered symbol of a raven, the holy sign of Mor, god of death and dreams. Matthias stepped inside, boots cracking on ancient bones and brittle leaves. The air turned cold. The interior was choked in decay, stone pews cracked in half, the altar a sunken slab strewn with burned offerings and dead birds, their eyes plucked out. Votive candles long extinguished left trails of wax like teardrops. A massive statue of Mor had been defaced, its face gouged, its wings broken, as if clawed at by something feral. But it was the walls that held Matthias's gaze. He ran his gloved fingers along the faded carvings, partially obscured by age and mold. With effort he made out scenes etched in stylized agony, villagers bowing to a crowned figure with a beast's maw, a man feasting upon his kin, and finally a black sun rising over a field of corpses. At the base of the altar, scratched deep and crude, were 3 words in ancient Reichsspiel. Hunger never dies. Matthias stepped back, pistol drawn, senses alert. The wind howled through the gaps in the stone, carrying with it a child's laugh, warbled and wrong, drifting in from nowhere. He left without looking back. That night, the storm broke. Rain lashed Drachenfeld in sheets, wind battering shutters and shivering the village awake. Thunder cracked like the judgment of the gods. Screams pierced the storm. Matthias was already out the door, boots splashing in the mud as villagers clustered near the southern fields with lanterns and pitchforks, faces pale, eyes wide. At the center of the gathering, crumpled like discarded cloth, lay the body of old Marta Weiss, the village midwife. Her gray hair was matted with rain. Her skin, once ruddy with age, was now a ghastly parchment white. Her mouth hung open in a frozen scream. Her limbs were stiff, twisted, and her chest had collapsed inward, like her heart had been crushed from the inside. And not a drop of blood remained in her veins. Matthias knelt beside her, lifting one eyelid with 2 fingers. The eyeball was cloudy, but her pupils had narrowed into slits, as if the last thing she saw had broken the laws of nature. The villagers gasped and recoiled. One man vomited. "No bite marks," Matthias said aloud. "No torn throat. It took her blood, yes, but not like an animal. Like a—" He stopped, eyes narrowing. There, in the mud by Marta's foot, a single footprint, barely visible, a bare foot, wide and talon-toned, sunk deep into the wet earth. Too large for any man, too malformed for beastmen. But most disturbing, no entry, no exit, just the print. It had stood, watched, fed, then vanished. The crows began to circle overhead again, black wings flapping above the corpse. Matja had lived her entire life in Drachenfeldt, delivered generations of children, laid out the dead. Now she'd joined them. Matthias stood, voice grim. This thing isn't killing out of hunger, it's killing out of ritual. He looked toward the forest, where thunder echoed through the trees. We have awakened something old. Chapter 5. Tracks of the Beast. Morning in Drakenfeld came reluctantly. The sun, a pale and distant thing, barely managed to pierce the mist that clung to the earth like a death shroud. The village wore the fatigue of mourning like a second skin, silent, tense, and haunted. No birds sang. Even the crows had moved on, perhaps sensing that what stalked this place had no use for carrion. Matthias Kruger stood at the edge of the southern field, the spot where old Marta's bloodless corpse had been found. The grass was still flattened in a circle around it, darkened by the heavy boots of frightened peasants and storm rain. But what held Matthias's attention was farther out, toward the boundary where the cultivated land met the ancient gnarled timberline. Track. Long, deep impressions in the mud, barefooted and clawed. 4 toes on each foot, but not symmetrical, more like malformed talons, splayed outward unnaturally, leaving deep gouges where the claws had dragged. Whatever left them walked upright, the spacing of the steps suggesting a disturbingly long stride, and yet the gait limped, staggered, as if it had once been human, but had forgotten how to move like one. Matthias followed the trail. The prince meandered past the boundary trees into the forest, skirting a narrow game path. Trees leaned away from the trail unnaturally, as if recoiling. At one point the tracks vanished for nearly 20 paces, then resumed again, as if the creature had taken flight or simply ceased to exist momentarily. He knelt and ran his fingers over a fresh gouge in the bark of a tree. Something had raked it with inhuman strength. The sap oozing from the wound was already drying, which meant it had been done less than a day ago. Then came the voice. "'Tain't no beast what made those prints." A rough voice rasped from the underbrush. Matthias turned, pistol half raised, but lowered it when he saw the source. A wiry man with a scraggly beard and wild eyes. He wore a cloak of stitched hides and stank of old blood and tannin. A trapper, maybe 50, maybe older, age blurred by too many winters and not enough warmth. "They said you'd come," the black-cloaked one, the trapper muttered, chewing something bitter. "You're too late." "Speak sense," Matthias demanded. "What do you know?" The man shuffled closer, cautious but urgent. "I saw it. A week past. Thought it was a stag at first, then a man, then both. Wrong in the limbs, back too long. Skin looked like it had been torn and stitched onto itself, smelled like rotting flowers. He tapped his head with a cracked fingernail. Didn't move right. Shoulders bent backward. Hands dragged the dirt even when upright. It walked like it forgot how bones were meant to bend. Matthias narrowed his eyes. Where? Northridge, near the old charcoal pits. The trapper's expression turned ashen. It spoke. Didn't scream. Spoke. Hissed. What did it say? The man leaned close, lips trembling. It said, Matthias. Like it knew you. Not just your name. Like it had tasted it. Silence fell. Even the wind paused, heavy with unseen eyes. Matthias's grip on his pistol tightened. Show me the ridge. The trapper paled. No, I done told you what I know. That thing ain't natural. It don't kill for food. It kills for remembrance. It looks at you like it's counting your sins. I don't need you brave, Matthias said. I just need you useful. The man hesitated, then nodded. Together, they vanished into the woods. Behind them, a low breath of wind passed over the field, and the strange tracks began to fill in, not with mud or leaves, but with a thin black residue that smelled faintly of grave dust. Chapter 6. Red moon rising. The night sky cracked open like an old wound. Above Drachenfeldt, the moon rose not as silver guardian, but as a boiling red orb, swollen and angry. Clouds parted like peeling skin to reveal it, casting its crimson hue across the damp thatched rooftops and skeletal trees. The villagers whispered of omens and cursed bloodlines. Mothers wept and locked their doors with trembling hands. Dogs howled until their throats gave out. Matthias Kruger stood alone at the edge of the chapel square, eyes upturned to the sky. The red light slicked over his face like wet paint. His breath fogged in the cold air, but sweat glistened on his brow. Something was watching the village tonight. Something was waiting. Dreams of the rutborn. Sleep did not come easily, and when it did, it was not kind. Matthias lay on the tavern's hard cot, his coat wrapped around him, pistol close to hand, but his eyes fluttered and the world fell away. He stood in a forest of blackened bone. The trees were rib cages, the ground was meat. A bloated moon wept black ichor onto the soil, where it hissed and bubbled. Before him, a corpse, pallid and contorted, its mouth slack and wet, a man, but not. Its jaw hung loose as it gorged itself on the steaming viscera of a child that looked too much like someone from the village. The corpse's stomach was distended, yet still it ate, tearing muscle from bone with clawed fingers, sucking marrow as if to steal the last warmth of life. It looked up. Its face was Matthias's own. He awoke with a strangled gasp, hand already grasping his weapon. Dawn had not yet come. A bell was ringing, slow, erratic, panicked. Desecration of the dead. Matthias strode through the mist, pistol holstered but hand on the grip. The chapel of Sigmar loomed ahead, its bell tolling madness. A boy no older than 12 met him at the steps, pale and shivering. "The graveyard, sir. It's open. The dead, they're open." Kruger pushed past, entering the burial grounds behind the chapel. What he found made his blood freeze. The graves had been torn open, not dug, burst. Soil flung outward in violent sprays. Half-rotted wooden coffins shattered from within. Jagged splinters jutted from the ground like ribs. A corpse, still draped in its burial shroud, hung in the branches of a tree, impaled on a limb, its jaw dislocated from a silent scream. Matthias examined a broken coffin. Inside lay the body of old man Voss, dead these past 6 weeks from a fever. His arms were twisted at impossible angles, skin bloated and burst at the joints. Yet what sickened Matthias most was that his fingernails had snapped and cracked on the lid, from the inside. "Not dug out," Matthias whispered. They woke. Near the far edge of the yard, one grave was missing altogether. No mound, no marker. just a shallow crater, as if something had clawed free and walked into the fog. Salt lines placed by the priest had been broken. Iron nails, once hammered into stone for warding, now lay bent, as though forced outward by some internal pressure. Behind him, Father Jurgen stumbled into the yard, clutching his rusted hammer. "They were sealed," the priest muttered. "Buried proper, prayers, rites." "Not enough," Matthias said. "Not for what's feeding here." Then he paused. A strange sound cut through the fog, the low, wet chuckle of something that had forgotten how to laugh. Matthias turned, weapon raised, but nothing stood there. Only the fog. But the laugh lingered. Chapter 7. The Stranger Below. The descent began beneath the chapel of Sigmar, where the stone floor behind the altar concealed a rusted iron grate, a trapdoor covered in dust and prayer scrolls. Matthias had pried it open with effort and little ceremony. The hinges groaned like dying men. The air below exhaled rot and old death. Torch in one hand, pistol in the other, Matthias stepped into the dark. A spiral staircase chiseled from bedrock led him down into the bowels of Drachenfeldt. Each step groaned beneath his weight, flakes of damp mortar drifting from the walls. The air turned colder, heavier. The red glow of the cursed moon above had no reach here. Only the flickering amber of his torch painted the stones in trembling light. Beneath the village, the catacombs sprawled like veins, twisting tunnels and bone-lined alcoves, ossuaries crammed with skulls stacked in reverent silence. The bones of generations slept here, once blessed, once sealed. No longer. The nest. Deeper in, the sanctity began to unravel. The walls, once etched with holy scripture, had been defaced, the carvings gouged out and overwritten with jagged runes and crude symbols, spiraling and aggressive, etched with sharpened bone or claw. Words in blood, prayers inverted. Matthias moved with caution, breath shallow. His torchlight caught movement, shadows darting just beyond his vision, but no sound came, no footsteps, only breathing. He reached a wide chamber, once a crypt, now a lair. Bones littered the floor. Not buried, not stacked, spilled, torn, reaped. Femurs snapped, skulls caved inward, ribs cracked like eggshells. Blood crusted on the stone, thick in places, still wet in others. At the far end, Matthias found a nest, a crude mound of rags, furs, and refuse. Half-gnawed limbs poked from beneath, bundled like bedding. Stuck in the wall above it were child-sized shoes, wedding rings, a cracked doll's head, and a priest's cowl, still stained, the cloth soaked through with darkened blood. The Sigmarite sigil had been scratched out, replaced with a drawn maw of fangs drooling over a corpse. Matthias crouched and lifted a piece of torn robe. Beneath it, wrapped in a delicate bundle, lay a spine, carefully cleaned and coiled like a trophy. Small. Female. He stood slowly. This wasn't savagery. This was ritualized horror. The creature didn't just kill. It curated, remembered, loved. That's when he saw it. A mirror, set low against the far wall. It was old, cracked, but positioned deliberately. And in the flickering firelight, something moved in the reflection. A twisted silhouette. Long arms, hunched back, limbs twitching. It hunched low, swaying slightly. Watching him. Matthias spun. Nothing there. But the nest rustled behind him, and a low hiss rose from the darkness like steam from a grave. The mark. Before leaving, Matthias placed a ring of salt around the mirror and whispered a binding prayer, an old rite, barely sanctioned, meant not to banish evil but to hold it in place. He backed out slowly, torch sputtering. And just before he left the crypt, he noticed something scratched into the stone near the exit. Crude, but purposeful. "I remember you." His name was carved beneath it, Matthias Kruger, in his own handwriting. He fled the tunnels in silence. Chapter 8. The Beastman Raid. The first scream came with the dawn. Not the cry of a waking child or startled farmer, but the gut-wrenched shriek of something being torn apart. It echoed down from the hills like a death bell. Matthias Kruger was already strapping on his armor when the horns began to blow. Deep, braying things carved from twisted bone and filled with chaos. Beastmen. From the edge of the northern ridge they came like an avalanche of muscle, fur, and madness, a full war band, at least 30 strong, Ungers with jagged spears and rusted cleavers, Bestigers with axes the size of butchers' slabs, and behind them, towering above all, a massive gore-bull with a skull-faced helm and a massive, rune-carved club. Drachenfeldt had been asleep. It would wake in blood. The defense of Drakenfeld. Matthias met the terrified townsfolk near the square, men with pitchforks, hammers, and old swords, boys not yet hardened, old men too stubborn to die in bed. He gave them no speeches, only orders. Barricade the main road, oil the gates, archers in the upper windows, no mercy, no surrender. The villagers moved with desperation sharpened by fear. Wood crashed into place, nails flew, and torches were lit. The red sun had barely crested the horizon when the first beastmen reached the palisade and hell opened its throat. They hit like a siege engine. Spears stabbed through the cracks. A screaming Ungor was caught in a loop of chains and yanked through the barricade, his limbs torn free like a chicken in a meat grinder. Fire poured from the upper levels as pitch was flung down, igniting the braying horde. Matthias stood atop the barricade, repeater pistol in hand, his long coat flaring with each shot. The weapon barked 5 times, 5 exploding heads in the crowd. Still they came. The gates buckled, then shattered. The Gorbel charged through, slamming aside defenders like twigs. One man was cleaved in 2 from shoulder to hip, blood sprang like a broken cask. Matthias met the creature in the square, drawing his silver-inlaid longsword. The impact of their clash sent shockwaves through the mud, his blade carving into the beast's shoulder while the club missed his head by inches and caved in the wall behind him. They circled, breath steaming in the chill air. The Pale Watcher. As the battle raged, Matthias paused mid-duel. His peripheral vision caught something that didn't belong. On the hillside, amid the chaos, there stood a figure, alone, unmoving, far taller than a man, dressed in rags and bone, its skin corpse-white, stretched tight over a grotesque starved frame. Long arms hung to its knees, and its eyes, twin pinpricks of hunger, glowed faintly in the dawn. It did not fight. It did not run. It watched. His tongue flicked over cracked lips. Matthias's stomach twisted. The Gorbel charged again. He narrowly dodged, rolled through the mud, and came up swinging. His blade took the creature's leg, severing tendon and muscle. It howled, fell to one knee, and Matthias plunged the sword up through its jaw, the point exiting the top of its skull in a spray of gore. It collapsed in a gurgling heap. The villagers cheered, but Matthias didn't hear them. When he turned back toward the hillside, the pale figure was gone. Only a smear of ash remained where it had stood, and in that moment he realized the beastmen weren't the real threat. They were prey too. The battle ended with scorched fields, ruined barricades, and 16 villages dead, many torn limb from limb. Others simply vanished, their blood trails leading toward the forest and stopping. No bodies were found. Matthias stood in the aftermath, drenched in sweat and blood, staring at the horizon. Whatever hunted Drachenfeld had used the beastmen as cover, a distraction, a game. It was growing bolder, and it was very, very hungry. Chapter 9. Ashes and Bones. The smoke from the battle still hung thick over Drachenfeldt, like the veil of Mor himself. Ash drifted in lazy spirals through the ruined village square, settling onto blood-soaked mud, shattered fences, and smoldering corpses. The villagers moved like phantoms through the aftermath, searching for survivors, weeping over the mutilated dead. One woman sobbed uncontrollably over what remained of her son, little more than a shredded torso wrapped in what had once been a bright blue tunic. But something didn't sit right with Matthias. The Beastmen had fled. Not routed, not shattered, retreated. He had seen it with his own eyes. Besiegers, fearsome even when on fire, dropping their weapons and bolting into the forest like frightened children, ungors flailing and yelping as if something unseen had brushed their souls with ice. Not the behavior of chaos spawned drunk on blood. Matthias stalked through the broken gate toward the perimeter where the last of the bodies lay. He moved past the villagers, past the sobbing and the crows returning to their feast, and toward a groaning sound, barely audible over the crackle of distant flame. There, pinned beneath a collapsed cart, lay a dying gore, its twisted horn broken at the base, and a shattered shaft of pitchfork buried deep in its abdomen. It bled thick black blood from its maw and struggled to breathe, gurgling through a crushed lung. Matthias crouched low beside it. He didn't speak. Not at first. He simply drew a small vial from his coat, a clear glass ampoule filled with blessed water from the shrines of Altdorf. He dribbled a few drops onto the beastman's exposed flesh. It screamed, a choking, inhuman wail as the water hissed and seared its skin like boiling acid. "You will speak," Matthias said flatly, "or you will die screaming." The creature spat black blood at him. It missed. Then it laughed. A guttural, bubbling laugh, more gurgle than glee. "We came for meat," it growled, "for blood, for glory under the eye." "And you ran," Matthias said coldly. "You turned your back and fled. What scared you, beast?" The gore's milky eyes flicked open, wide, empty of defiance now. "You think we are kings of the dark?" it rasped. "We are but vermin in the shadow of it." Matthias leaned in closer. "Of what?" The gore's lips split into a grin that stretched too wide. Its breath stank of decay. "The bone thirster." The words slithered into the air like a curse. Matthias froze. The name sat wrong in his ears, not in a way of myth, but of recognition, like a whisper from the crypts beneath the world. "What is it?" he demanded. The beastman coughed, black froth bubbling from its throat. "It wakes. It feeds. It was here long before your stone village. It drinks the bones, leaves the meat. It knows your name, hunter." Then, with one final, shuddering breath, the gore's chest caved in. Its eyes glazed, muscles stiffened. And then something happened that made Matthias recoil. The corpse jerked once, back arched, then collapsed into dust, as if something had sucked the last essence of it away from inside. Only bones remained, polished, clean, and steaming faintly in the morning air. Matthias rose slowly, jaw clenched. The beastmen hadn't been routed by men. They had sensed something greater, something older, a predator in the dark. And now it had a name. Chapter 10. Lore of the Dead. The woods east of Drakenfeld were older than memory, untouched by axe or fire. Trees there grew close and crooked, their bark blackened like burned flesh, their roots clawing at the earth like buried hands trying to escape. It was in these forgotten places that the unwanted and untrusted made their homes, those whose gifts were shunned by Sigmar's priests, but whose knowledge still served the desperate. Matthias Kruger rode alone beneath the boughs, guided by a red thread wound around trees, left in secret by the one he sought. It led him to a cairn of stones, and beneath them, a moss-choked door half buried in the loam. He knocked once, twice, then stepped back. The door creaked open. A figure emerged, hunched and half done by candlelight. He was ancient, skin the color of parchment, draped in layers of patchwork robes and strings of bird skulls, bones and drying herbs. His eyes were milky and white, but they turned to Matthias with unmistakable awareness. "Back again, Kruger," the hedge wizard rasped. "You smell of blood and grave dirt." "You said you'd never speak of the Strigoi again," Matthias replied coldly, "but I need to know, now." The old man said nothing for a time, then stepped aside and let Matthias enter. The lore of the Strigoi. The hut's interior was a shrine to forbidden knowledge. Shelves of tattered books bound in human skin, jars filled with yellowing eyes, preserved tongues, bones etched with runes. A fire burned low in a cauldron, filling the air with a choking sweetness, burnt lavender and fat. The hedge wizard knelt beside a pile of withered scrolls. "The Strigoi were once kings," he murmured. "Golden-crowned rulers of the Strigoi tribes, mighty in blood, proud in strength. But they were betrayed, mocked by the other vampire lines, their pride broken, their lands taken. Their sanity snapped." He shuffled forward, dragging a long, jagged nail across a blackened page. "They fled into the crypts, into the earth. They began to feed like animals, no longer with charm, but with fang and claw, gorging like beasts, their minds twisted. They became hollow things, craving not just blood, but memory, identity. They eat flesh, yes, but more than that, they feed on who you are." Matthias frowned. "I've seen trophies, bones arranged in patterns, names scratched in walls." The old man nodded. "They believe if they eat enough of someone, they become them. But it's madness. They consume and forget, over and over, a hunger that remembers nothing." "Can they be killed?" Matthias asked. The hedge wizard met his eyes. "Yes, but not easily. Fire and silver, but you must strike while it's weakened, when it's digesting. Otherwise it will know you're coming, and it will leave nothing behind." Matthias stood, cloak swirling behind him. "The one here calls itself the bone-thirster." The wizard froze. His mouth opened, but no words came. He staggered back from the fire, suddenly pale. "That one, that thing was buried beneath Drakenfeld centuries ago, a noble who feasted on his kin during the Black Hunger. They sealed him under Mars Chapel with iron, salt, and the bones of a priest. If he walks again, the seal is broken, the land will rot." A cold wind brushed through the hut, though no windows were open. Matthias turned to the door. "I'll stop him." The wizard didn't respond. The broken seer. Matthias returned to Drakenfeld well past midnight, exhausted, torch sputtering in the damp. He did not sleep. At dawn a scream rose from the woods. A hunting boy, white as death, stumbled into the square babbling of blood and bones. They found the hedge wizard's hut ruined. The door lay ripped from its hinges, splinters driven deep into the surrounding trees. Inside, the fire was extinguished. Every candle melted into a pool of wax, fused to the floor like bloodstains. The wizard's body hung from the rafters, not by rope, but by his own spine, twisted and pulled from his back like a grotesque marionette. His throat had been crushed with a single hand, his face frozen in terror, tongue swollen and torn from his mouth. On the wall, scrawled in blood, were words in a crude, childlike hand. "No more secrets. I know what I am." Matthias stood in the doorway, jaw clenched. The bone-thirster knew he was asking questions, and it was answering. Chapter 11. Blood in the Bell Tower. The night began in silence. No owls called, no insects hummed. Even the wind that so often wept through Drachenfeldt's rotting eaves had stilled, like the village itself was holding its breath. The bell tower stood tall above the square, crooked and skeletal, its warped beams groaning with age. It had once been used to call for prayer or fire or to ring in the harvest festival. Now it served a simpler purpose, a lookout. And tonight, it rang with blood. The first scream. A sentry atop the tower, a young man named Tomas, barely old enough to grow a beard, had just finished lighting the upper lantern when something moved across the edge of his vision. A blur, a whisper of rags on wind. He turned, and something took him. One moment he stood. The next, his legs remained, rooted in place, as the rest of him vanished upward in a wet, gurgling scream that cut off mid-breath. By the time the other guards below reacted, the bell began to toll of its own accord. But the sound wasn't clean. It rang with a wet clang, splattered in flesh and bone, as Thomas' upper torso crashed down from above, missing its face, ribs torn open like a fruit rind. Something else fell with him, a black tooth, long and curved like a dagger. Slaughter from the rafters. The tower erupted in chaos. Guards rushed up the winding steps, but they never reached the top. A blur of pale limbs and shriveled flesh descended, moving with impossible speed. Claws raked through the first man, slicing his skull from scalp to chin, spraying gore across the walls. Another tried to fire a crossbow. His hands were removed before the bolt left the chamber, followed by his jaw. From the square below, villagers watched in horror as the tower swayed unnaturally, shadow and movement dancing through the slats like some feral windstorm trapped within. Someone screamed, "Vampire!" Matthias ascends. Matthias was already in motion, sprinting up the outer stairs 2 at a time. His coat flared behind him, repeater pistol holstered, but the crossbow in his hands was longer, heavier, an heirloom from the Grand Temple of Sigmar, engraved with prayers of the flame and tipped with a blessed silver bolt. The weapon hummed with quiet fury. He burst into the tower's highest chamber and saw it. The bone thirster. No longer lurking, no longer hiding. It was tall, gaunt, and wreathed in its victims. Its limbs were elongated, hands dragging against the blood-slicked boards. Flesh clung to it like wet parchment, mottled with rot. Bones jutted from its back like spines, curved and sharpened. Its mouth stretched wider than any human's should, filled with rows of black teeth, slick with blood. It turned, and Matthias saw its eyes. Not beast's eyes, human eyes, intelligent, ancient, hungry. Matthias hissed, in a voice like wind through a crypt. He didn't hesitate. The bolt flew. It struck the creature just below the collarbone. A burst of white flame and silver sparks exploded from the impact. The vampire shrieked, a sound that split the air, high-pitched and wet, like steam escaping from a slit throat. The bone thirster reeled backward, part of its chest boiling away, black smoke pouring from the wound. It struck the tower wall, cracking the wood, and burst through it, leaping into the night with inhuman strength, vanishing into the tree line like a shadow with wings. The bell tower groaned, and then all was still. The aftermath. 7 men lay dead in the tower, their bodies shredded, their blood coating the floorboards like varnish. Pieces of them hung from the rafters. The bell swung untethered, thudding wetly with every sway. Matthias leaned against the railing, breathing hard. He had wounded it, not killed, but wounded. And now it was raging, bleeding, hunting. From the forest came a single sound, a howl, not of a wolf, not of a man, something in between, and very, very angry. Chapter 12. The devil's nest. The woods had changed. Matthias Kruger rode through the Waldschatten as if cutting through a wound in the world, where the trees bled sap as dark as ink, and birds fell dead from the branches with no cause. The air stank of iron, wet soil, and something far older than rot. No path guided him now, only a trail of ichor, black and glistening, left behind by the bone-thirster as it fled from the wound Matthias had burned into its chest. He had tracked monsters before, but this trail was different. It didn't meander. It led home. The Barrow Mound. Nestled in a hollow where even the wind dared not touch, Matthias found the mound. A barrow, half sunken into the earth, its stone entrance flanked by twin statues long since decayed. Time had worn their faces smooth, but he recognized the ancient armor, the crowns of bone carved into their helms. These were not peasants' graves. This was a noble tomb. He dismounted, drawing both torch and blade. His crossbow, reloaded with another blessed bolt, was slung across his back, ready. The air grew colder as he descended into the dark. The descent into the nest. The tunnel sloped downward sharply, its walls carved stone smeared with claw marks and cryptic symbols etched in dried blood. Bones lined the passage, not scattered but arranged in precise, ritualistic formations. Femurs crossing over ribs, skulls stacked into pyramids, vertebrae suspended on sinew like wind chimes. At the heart of the barrow, the tunnel opened into a great chamber, circular and domed, its ceiling lost in shadow. The walls pulsed with dampness, black mold growing in spiraling veins. In the center, a throne, built from sarcophagus lids, iron chains, and fused femurs. Upon it, cast aside like a discarded shroud, lay a cloak of noble velvet, rotted but once regal, the crest of a dying house stitched in faded silver. Beside the throne, a mural had been carved directly into the wall, a crude, gory chronicle. Matthias stepped forward, torch raised. He saw a nobleman, proud and powerful, adorned in finery, standing over his subjects. Then war, chaos, famine. The noble fell to his knees in the next image, devouring corpses, his mouth black with blood. In the final carving, he stood alone, his face animalistic, his subjects reduced to bones beneath his feet. Beneath the image, a name was etched in jagged script, half ruined but still legible. Akendladmir. The monsters passed. Matthias spoke the name aloud, voice echoing like a curse. Akendladmir. He remembered the tales, an Ostermark noble who ruled during the Age of Darkness, a man of ambition and cruelty. When the black hunger swept through the land, he closed his gates, let his people starve, and feasted on their corpses. When his court rebelled, they dragged him into the forest and buried him alive, sealing the mound with salt, silver, and sacred bones. But something had opened the seal. The vampire had returned, and in his madness he had become something worse than undead, a predator shaped by famine, obsession, and hate. Matthias turned to leave, and froze. On the far side of the room, carved into the stone, he saw his own name. Matthias Kruger, etched beneath a jagged crown. Below it, the same words the dying Gur had gasped. The bone-thirster remembers. Suddenly the air shifted. A rasping growl echoed from the tunnel behind him, not close but coming. Fuck. He raised his torch, readying his blade, heart pounding like a war drum. The bone-thirster was returning to its nest, and it would not find it empty. Chapter 13. The Hollow Maw. The air in the barrow went still, so still it screamed. Every torch flame in the chamber quivered, shrank, and then died, snuffed as though the dark itself had inhaled. Only Matthias's own torch flickered feebly, barely pushing back the blackness that seemed to thicken around him like congealed blood. From the tunnel behind, the sound came. Not footsteps. A slither, a scrape, a pulse. Then a voice. Not a whisper, but a thing inside his head, wet, ancient, seething with memory and hunger. I see you, I remember your taste. The devil descends. Achen Vladimir emerged from the dark like a nightmare being born again. No longer shrouded in shadows or illusions, he showed himself in full. A skeletal titan, hunched but towering, his body a grotesque hybrid of noble rot and monstrous evolution. His skin was a stretched parchment of yellowed pallor, ribcage exposed, black veins throbbing beneath the surface. His jaw unhinged wide, revealing rows of jagged, overlapping teeth. Bone horns jutted from his skull, and his eyes burned with red coals of remembered hunger. Matthias didn't speak. He fired first. The blessed bolt struck true, piercing the monster's side, not the heart, but deep, sizzling on impact, smoke curling from the wound. Achen howled, not in pain, but in rage. And he moved. Faster than thought. The vampire crashed into Matthias like a falling cathedral, claws raking across his chest, flinging him like a rag doll. He struck the bone wall with a crunch, ribs cracking. His sword skittered across the stone floor. Matthias rolled, coughing blood, just as Achen lunged again, teeth snapping inches from his throat. He rammed his forearm up, taking the bite on his arm instead. The teeth sank deep. Agony exploded through him. His blood was taken, fast, brutal, electric. The drain wasn't just physical, it was like something sucked the warmth, the memory, the soul from his veins. He screamed, but he did not surrender. With his free hand, Matthias reached for his belt, where a silver stake, blessed in Altorf and engraved with passages from the Book of Judgments, waited. He drove it into Achen's chest with all his might. The impact was like lightning striking meat. The vampire reeled back, screaming now, a true scream, primal and high, like a child dying in reverse. The stake stuck just left of the heart, sizzling with holy fire. Black blood gushed, and steam erupted from the wound as the monster stumbled. Matthias collapsed, vision blurred. His arm was shredded, blood pouring from where teeth had riven flesh from bone. He dragged himself backward as Achen thrashed, crashing into his bone throne, collapsing it in a shatter of skulls. The creature staggered to his knees, clawing at the embedded stake, wailing, not just in pain, but betrayal, like something beloved had been taken. He hissed through broken fangs, "I was king." And then he fled, crashing through the far wall like a charging beast, stone and earth bursting around him. Beneath the surface, Matthias lay there, the pain dull now, cold spreading from the bite. His skin had paled, his heartbeat faltered. He crawled to his torch, reignited it with trembling hands, and stared at his arm. The wound oozed black, red sludge. Veins darkened beneath his skin. Something had entered him, but he had wounded it. He had driven it into the open, and it would not forget that. Chapter 14. Cleansing Fire. The forest did not welcome him. Matthias Kruger staggered through the trees, each step a battle of will. His coat hung in tatters, soaked in blood, his and the vampire's. His right arm was bandaged in leather and ash-soaked cloth, but it still bled, slow and black. He moved like a man half dead, sustained only by hatred and purpose. Behind him, the barrow mound smoked, its bones torn open. Head Drakenfeld. The village was still, burned, scarred, and waiting. The return of the witch hunter. They found him at the edge of the square, mud-soaked, leaning against the remains of the gate, eyes sunken and burning with fever. A small crowd gathered, villagers whispering as they took in the sight. Some gasped. Others wept. But none cheered. Victory did not feel like salvation. Burgermeister Hess approached cautiously, face pale. Is it done? Matthias looked up, his voice like gravel and flame. No, but it's dying. The sanctification. They carried him to the chapel where Father Jurgen washed the wound with scalding holy water that hissed against Matthias's flesh. The pain made him scream, but it burned the taint back. At least for now. He could feel it inside him still, a hunger, a whisper, but it was quiet. Matthias did not rest. He ordered the villagers to exhume the bodies in the ruined graveyard, clearing every bone, every scrap of corrupted soil. The graves of the desecrated were burned, salted, sealed in iron. He sanctified the chapel ruins with a relic, a hammer-shaped medallion soaked in relic oil, pressed into every corner, every broken stone. By dusk, a funeral pyre rose outside the village, atop the hill that overlooked the fields. At its center, a blackened body, curled, collapsed. Arkan Vladimir, the bone thirster. They had found him just beyond the forest, curled around the silver stake, gnawing at it with broken teeth like a starved dog. He was no longer a terror, just a corpse. The purge. The villagers stood in a wide circle, torches trembling in their hands. The pyre towered, a grotesque silhouette against the moonless sky. Father Jurgen stepped forward to read the last rites. His voice quaked, but he spoke them true. Matthias stood beside him, leaning on a bloodied cane, face pale, eyes hollow. Then he lit the pyre. The flames roared high, orange and white, spitting sparks like souls rising into the heavens. The body writhed once, just once, as the heat took hold. Skin cracked, bone blackened, fangs hissed and cracked. Then all was ash. The sealing of the bones. What remained, a few scorched bones, some too stubborn for fire, were gathered into a coffin of lead, lined with cloth soaked in holy oils. Father Jurgen etched blessings in high Richtspiel across the lid, while Matthias drove in silver nails, each hammered with a psalm to Sigmar. The coffin was lowered into the earth beneath the chapel ruins, encased in a second box of stone. The earth above it was salted and ringed with iron warding nails, hammered in by the witch hunter's own trembling hand. As the final stone was placed, Matthias knelt, whispering the last benediction. May your hunger rot in silence, and may none ever remember your name. He stood slowly and walked away. Chapter 15. The Hunter Marked. The Drakenfeld was quiet now. The fires had died. The bodies were buried. The villagers returned to their fields with shovels instead of blades, trying to plant crops in earth still soaked with blood. The crows had grown fat and lazy on corpses, now fewer in number. The sky had cleared for the first time in weeks, yet a cold fog still clung to the village like an unwanted memory. Matthias Kruger stood at the edge of the village, overlooking the salted chapel ruins and the freshly sealed grave. A wind stirred his long coat. Beneath it, bandages wrapped his chest and arm, thick with black vein scars. The wound from the vampire's bite no longer bled, but it hadn't healed. The skin was gray around the edges, the flesh sunken. At night it itched, deep in the marrow, like something small and hungry had nested there. He would not let the priest examine it. The mark. Matthias removed his glove, revealing the worst of it, a crescent-shaped scar, still wet to the touch, ringed with bruising that refused to fade. When he gripped his pistol or crossbow too tightly, his hand would tremble. He could still feel Arkan's fangs in the muscle, even now. But worse than the wound was the dreams. Every night since the battle, he saw the crypt. He stood alone. He saw himself in the bone thirster's throne, feasting. And waking up each morning was harder than the last. The villagers had tried to offer him a feast, bread, beer, even coin. One girl, no more than 10, gave him a small bone charm to keep away the bad dreams. Matthias took it. He didn't tell her he was the bad dream now. At dawn he mounted vengeance, the warhorse still scarred, but alive. The beast snorted, as if sensing the wrongness in his rider. Father Jurgen approached. "You could stay, rest, let the priests of Altdorf tend to you." Matthias met his gaze. "And if I turn before they arrive, who will stop me?" The priest had no answer. Matthias offered one final warning. "Salt your walls. Never let the chapel fall again, and if another stranger comes whispering old names, kill them." Then he turned toward the fog, into the mists. As the village disappeared behind him, swallowed by the mist, Matthias felt the weight settle on him once more, not just of exhaustion, but of a truth he couldn't deny. The bone thirster had not been the last. It had whispered of others, of deeper crypts, of kings beneath the soil who had never truly died. He rode on, into a world blind to the shadows beneath its feet. And somewhere in the dark corners of his soul, a voice whispered in his own voice, "I remember your taste." He did not flinch. He would fight the hunger, until the day he couldn't. And on that day he hoped someone like him would be waiting.